Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our webinar today on how to make your peatland restoration project market ready, hosted by Caledonian Climate. I'm Gail Hurly, a sustainable finance specialist, and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. A big thank you to all of you for taking the time to be part of this conversation, and particular thanks, of course, to our three expert panelists who are here to share their experience and insights with you all. Freddie, James and Jacob joining us online. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you all. I'll ask you to introduce yourselves in just a moment. But before that, let's remind ourselves why we're here today. A really important topic at hand, scaling peatland restoration. It's one of the biggest opportunities for nature restoration in the UK. In particular, we're here to discuss how we can better leverage voluntary carbon markets to bring more financing to vital natural capital projects that this country desperately needs to see. Some of the questions we'll be exploring with our panellists and with you all today are: if you're a landowner, like James here, how do you make your peatland restoration project market ready? What are carbon credit buyers really looking for? We'll be hearing from Jacob on that. And how can you ensure a high integrity project? I know Freddie has a lot to say about that topic, and there's much more. So let's kick off. This is how we will plan to organise the session today. We'll first hear from our three experienced panellists for about 25 or 30 minutes. I'll then open up to Q&A and invite all of you participating online to please post your toughest questions for our panellists in the chat. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. Please do identify yourselves and let us know what your interest is in peatland restoration and whether your question is directed towards a specific panellist. Perhaps now on to the topic at hand. Before I turn to our panel, perhaps a few words of introduction or scene setting from myself. Peatlands cover around 12% of the UK's land area. They're a really important ecosystem here. They're one of our most effective carbon stores, we know that, but sadly they're also amongst our most degraded ecosystems. We've known for quite some time now that we need to restore peatlands at scale if we're serious about meeting our climate goals. We also know that restoring peatlands offers one of our highest nature-based returns on investment, but it's all about the money, isn't it? This restoration is expensive, and although public funding has increased over recent years, although we're seeing some changes to funding, it's covering only a fraction of what's really needed. So we need a mix of investment from different sources, and of course voluntary carbon markets have emerged as one of those critical sources of funding. At the same time, I think it's fair to say that leveraging that opportunity sometimes feels far from easy, right? And the market has had its fair share of controversies, let's be honest. So that's where this conversation comes in. We're in very safe hands because we have three expert panellists from across the full chain of the voluntary carbon market: the landowner, the developer, the buyer, to help demystify it all, unpack critically what integrity looks like, how we can ensure high integrity projects when we are restoring peatland, ones that will both contribute to climate goals as well as drive more trust in carbon markets. So we're here to help you all to understand how to maximise the opportunities this market presents. So enough from me, perhaps. Let's dive in, and I can perhaps turn to each of our panellists today and ask them to briefly introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about their role in all of this. So perhaps Freddie, I can turn to you first. Please tell us who you are and what your role is in the peatland restoration market.
Thanks, Gail. So I'm Freddie Ingleby, and I'm the Managing Director of Caledonian Climate. We are a vertically integrated peatland restoration developer. So we start with projects that are handshake around a coffee table with the landholder looking to get involved in peatland restoration. And we nurse them and help them through the whole ecosystem chain itself. So feasibility ground studies, design, development, professional management of the project through its implementation phase on the ground, and then focus on long-term monitoring thereafter. But we bundle all of that together and help also bring these projects to the market, with the aim of bringing landholders together with corporates looking to have a positive impact.
Great. So you know basically everyone who there is to know in all of this.
You could say that. It's a very widespread sector.
Great. Thank you very much, Freddie. Jacob, let me perhaps turn to you. Jacob's joining us online. Good to see you today, Jacob. Please introduce yourself and your role in the carbon market.
Yeah, thanks, Gail. Nice to see everybody. Jacob Bourgeois here. I'm representing Volkswagen Climate Partner. We're based in Munich, and we support the various brands and offices within the Volkswagen Group, basically to engage with the carbon markets to varying degrees. So they have various strategies, varying use cases. We guide them on that. We also provide investments and offtakes for specific project cases, basically across the world. We have a wide footprint, basically. Specifically for me, I'm the head of carbon strategies and innovation, meaning I head our technical functions, including project due diligence, portfolio management, market intelligence, innovative investments, kind of new approaches, things like this. And I'm representing the buyer's perspective today.
Great. Well, thank you, Jacob, for joining us today. And finally, let me turn to you, James. James, you're a farmer. This is actually your farm.
It is, yeah, that's right. That's Carroglen, yes.
This is peatland restoration in action. So we look forward to hearing more about that. But please, James, introduce yourself.
Yeah, so James, Robb, we're at Carroglen Farm in Comrie in Perthshire, and we are effectively a traditional Scottish hill farm running black-faced sheep, cross-textual sheep and some Highland cows with a bit of winter, with a sort of spring to autumn rented grazing for cattle. The ground is about 500, it ranges from 500 feet above sea level up to around about 3,000. So we go from quite productive, good soils of in-by ground up through sort of thinner, rockier soils and then up into the heather moorland. And in this particular instance, we had around about 70 hectares of peatland that required some form of action to restore and enhance. And so we, in this conversation, represent the sort of the land part of that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, we look forward to hearing more about this project later on in the conversation. So as you can see, we have a rich variety of perspectives here today. But perhaps I can turn to you, Freddie, first to kick off the conversation and start with why we're here in the first place. I touched on this in my introduction a little bit about the importance of peatland in the UK and restoring that peatland. There's so much more to say, and you're clearly very passionate about this, both at Caledonian Climate and you personally. But if you can tell us a little bit more about why we need to invest much, much more in peatland restoration and now, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on restoration being an expensive activity, and it is, but in the context of impact that we can have, it's one of the most cost-effective options that we have to have a positive impact now. And it's very, very unlikely that it fades out of being a priority for our policy directive that we have as a country, and that's fundamentally because peatlands are a problem for our greenhouse gas inventory today. In Scotland, they represent about 15% of the total inventory. And in the UK, it's somewhere between 4 and 5%. So in order for the government to meet their obligations, they need to restore peatlands. There's been a lot of public support for that. There's been funding available. That funding is decreasing. But crucially, that only accounts for the initial intervention that takes place to set the degraded peatland on the road to recovery. What we really need is a thriving natural capital market that provides the financial flows between all parties to allow these projects to be proactively monitored over time, tactically maintained to ensure they deliver on their intended outcomes, and then also generate the evidence and data to convince people that those things are taking place and that the intended outcomes are being realised. And so what I'm really looking forward to discussing today is how all of those different parties, ourselves, the landowner, and the buyer themselves, can come together to make that a reality.
So we should see peatland restoration as an investment rather than as a cost.
It's an investment in our future, ultimately.
Jacob, from a buyer's standpoint, are buyers just as passionate about peatland restoration as Freddie, and just how important it is as an investment in our future? What are buyers looking for in high integrity projects? Is it broadly the same things that Freddie was outlining just there? Are they looking for something different? And who are these buyers of these carbon credits anyway?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Maybe I'll take a step back and talk about the market generally and sort of how buyers operate within that. I think everyone who's been aware of the space knows it's been a challenging several years in this regard. Been a lot of evolutions here. I think the market's also developed quite a bit. I mean, it went from basically sort of a Kyoto Protocol means of driving investments into specific countries to meet climate obligations from specific countries, which meant basically just as long as you followed methodologies, you were good, to a shift away towards more of a voluntary approach, where it was a little bit more geared towards philanthropy. Maybe the claims changed a little bit. The carbon neutrality concept came into vogue, but it was still a very low level engagement, very, very few buyers, kind of the same set of project developers, same set of projects, intervention types over many, many years. And then I think you tried to see, around half a decade or so, a shift towards more of a professional market, one based on net zero strategies, one based on kind of companies coming to grips with the Paris Agreement and what the implications are for them. And I think there was a realization that you had to be much more professional about how you approach the whole thing commercially, contractually, methodologically, in terms of integrity, quality, all of this kind of stuff. Once that shift began to start, I think it unraveled very quickly. I mean, we almost sort of saw a backlash against that. There's been a lot of political reasons for this, also social reasons. And I think we've seen kind of over the last year or two, sort of a step back taken by many countries in terms of kind of commitments behind these kinds of drives. The Paris Agreement is still evolving. We have to see exactly where it goes. And so I think that puts buyers in a difficult position where they're essentially asked to maintain this level of rigor, kind of look into projects that maintain high integrity, but at the same time, there's very few legal rules or even kind of foundational principles available really to think about that. So, that's just the context within which I think a lot of buyers are sort of struggling at the moment. And in terms of where pockets...
So what signals as a buyer would make you confident in a project's integrity?
Well, there's sort of short-term and long-term measures that can be considered. So I would say short-term in terms of the major buyers that are still out there, which these are represented by certain large companies within the U.S. There's emerging companies within East Asia, Middle East. Some European buyers are still very invested. I think there's a lot of local initiatives that are very popular. So peatland restoration in the UK for any buyers with a European footprint could be quite attractive. What they essentially have to do, I think, is really build out this concept of integrity themselves, and that's sort of the approach we take. But there's different ways of doing that. Some buyers look much more at a reputational, marketing-driven aspect, almost going back to the philanthropy concept I talked about before. Others look at what the rating agencies are saying. There's rating agencies out there in the market who, even disagree a bit among themselves, but they sort of point in specific directions. And then there's what the larger buyers in the market, like Volkswagen, for example, do, which is to sort of build their own approach about what quality means for them. This is also becoming quite common among those that are still active in the market. And I mean, from our perspective, what I can say is we essentially look at three pillars of what a good project should have. I mean, first would basically be sort of a reputational screen based on, history of the project developer, the asset owner, the landholder, the country itself. Are there specific investment problems in that environment, legislative problems in that environment? That would just sort of provide a quick and dirty aspect of, is this a good place to actually make an investment into climate restoration? The second pillar would be more along the lines of, is this a good project to invest in? Is it a promising what it actually intends to do? That's getting back to what Freddie was saying before. If you invest in a project, is the methodology sound? Is there long-term MRV? Are there other uplift opportunities you can look at? social and environmental aspects that go beyond what the methodology is saying. And the third pillar would really just be the compliance aspect, which I think is something that we're fairly unique in doing. That's just looking at really deeply into who are we investing into. So not only does the project promise and do what it says it intends to do, but is this a person that is worth investing into, a project developer, a landowner? That's very, very important to us. And I think if all three of those pillars sort of align, we tend to say that's a high quality project.
And Freddie, does that resonate with you? And how do you design projects from the outset to meet those expectations?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of what Jacob's just said that resonates, and I think it does start first with the people involved and their track records, but then it is compounded by your ability to prove your track record and prove where you're heading forwards as well. So for us, the baseline benchmark position is the Peatland Code. And the Peatland Code is an internationally recognised government-backed standard that is on track to meet all of the necessary requirements, the ICRA endorsements, and there are some new locally developed standards, the BSI standard that it's going to meet as well, to give the confidence in the code. The problem is that we also then need to set our projects apart, and we need to demonstrate that they are delivering more than just the bare minimum. And that is what gives people like Jacob the confidence that it's a high quality, high integrity project. And so meet the Peatland Code, but commit to understanding if your project is being successful, commit to looking after it, commit to and demonstrably evidence that you are monitoring it, that you are maintaining it, and that it's not just a bit of paper there. And to do that, you need to be able to show evidence and data that that's not just words, it's actually fact.
So James, let me turn to you. You have practical experience of all of this. We see your farm here on the screen. We'd love to hear more about your experience of leveraging the voluntary carbon market on your farm. And some of the things that Freddie and Jacob were talking about in terms of creating a high quality, high integrity project, the importance of monitoring. How did you approach that on your farm? Did that feel like something that was a burden? Do you see value in it? Tell us a little bit more about your experience from going through this from the very beginning.
Yeah, so I'd probably answer that in two parts. So, the monitoring aspect, peatland restoration, in our view, is not a project that you do complete and move on and don't look back from. Peatland restoration is very much a do and then move on to the next phase, which for us very much and should be is the monitoring phase. And the monitoring phase for us was really building two pillars. One would be the protection of the project, and the other would be the sort of the maintenance and repair side. And from the protection side, we're really looking at external influences such as grazing animals, whether they are livestock or they're wildlife, red deer. And then from a repair and maintenance point of view is more of an internal, which is to do with the way in which we carried out the project. So there may be that certain dams have failed for particular reasons. Maybe we got the slope angle wrong on some of the peat hags that we repaired. Maybe we just used the wrong techniques in certain areas. And those two pillars are ultimately what is governing the way forward, the future, the immediate and longer term future of the project. And the monitoring is what governs that. So the monitoring for me, people go on about monitoring being very expensive, but monitoring is trying to stop the other two aspects becoming expensive. Because they can do quite quickly. So the monitoring is doing that. And ultimately, it's allowing us to understand whether or not the project is delivering what we wanted it to and what it needs to. There's a base level of monitoring that one needs to do, which we feel we've gone beyond that for reasons I'll come back to as the second part of your question. But ultimately, you need to be monitoring these projects so that you understand where the cost is and you can nip the cost early on this sort of thing. There is an element of public accountability. I mean, if you're taking public funds to carry out these projects, there is an accountability aspect there. But is the project delivering what we wanted it to, and can I use that data in other areas of my land management to further enhance projects that I am doing and make sense of other projects? Ultimately, that's kind of where we are. So the second part of that is we've kind of gone beyond the minimum standard, and I think that's probably reflected as to where we are now with our relationship with Volkswagen. In that, I'll go another step back. So at Carroglen, when we purchased it in 1980, it was very much a traditional hill farm with high input costs during the winter to feed a large number of animals, with a fairly low return profitability in the summer for when the lambs were sold. And we quickly realised that we were asking too much of the ground, and we moved in the 90s into much more of a soil focused and grazing focused. And if we concentrated on our soils and our grazing, then by default our animals would do well. So going into the peatland restoration was just an extension of that ethos going forward. And so when it came to the monitoring aspect and the cost of it, ultimately to me, the monitoring cost is part of the project, and that the project should deliver more value than that. And so that's where we kind of came from. And I feel that probably to the particular buyer that we've attracted, and we've been attracted to, it's demonstrated reliability, dependability, I guess, with the fact that we're committed to this project. And I feel that will hopefully move into areas where potentially other grant applications would demonstrate the same sort of culture and same sort of ethos. We like to think we're not making our future too shallow. That we may well attract other like-minded people or like-minded projects unrelated to this one that take us into areas that we didn't expect to go. So monitoring is seen by some, to answer your question, as a sort of a nuisance cost to the project, but it's a really essential part to manage the entire reason why you're doing it.
I think we see quite an interesting line of inquiry from buyers that links to what James was just saying there, in that, and Jacob touched on it earlier as well, it's track record looking back, and what's that trajectory about? Like, is change taking place? What's the gold star that people are moving forwards to as landowners? And that compelling narrative that James has just articulated becomes part of the Natural Capital Project's story, that means that it is sellable initially internally within businesses that are interested in getting involved with these projects, because they want to be able to feel that they're partnering with projects that are real and tangible, that they can see, touch and feel. And Carroglen is a really, really good example of that. And there are other business enterprises in and around Carroglen Farm that facilitate those abilities to come and experience and view the projects, which is also attractive, I think, in this and has been demonstrated through this project already as well.
So, well, congratulations, James, on all you've achieved on the farm so far. You talked about a baseline level of monitoring and going above and beyond that. Freddie, in practical terms, can going above and beyond that minimum baseline level of monitoring help increase the value and the credibility of those credits on the market?
Yeah, I think the evidence is starting to mount in that, absolutely. The Peatland Code, as I said before, is a great baseline, and it requires monitoring. It has a mandatory requirement that you do look after your project. And of course, if you don't, you won't realise the emission reductions that are forecast, and you'll get yourselves into all sorts of problems. Yep. I think where the interest comes in now is it's about much more than just the emission reductions. The emission reduction piece of a project is important, but it's almost a de facto piece. It's the bit that people can understand. It's the bit that you hang your hat on, perhaps, when you do a transaction. But being able to demonstrate that you are having a positive impact on water retention and water security. The whole of Scotland was under water scarcity through this summer. So there's a really positive story there, and you can demonstrate that objectively and through data. Similarly with flow attenuation for flood mitigation. Again, you can measure and understand that. And then nature as a whole, from a biodiversity perspective, again, there's a full suite of things you can do. And as I say, you can spend tens of thousands of pounds on doing it. And it's about pragmatically choosing the ones that are going to demonstrate the positive impact on your site in a way that's credible and auditable through any sort of due diligence process that may take place. And there's some really neat things appearing now. Bioacoustic monitoring for bird abundance and diversity, for example, is now fairly straightforward to deliver on the ground. And it's repeatable and it is standardized, which is great. And as we develop, these things will become more remote, more live. And if you don't have them in place, it will be very, very clear and obvious to buyers or investors that your project is at a standard or is not. And the Peatland code as a fundamental baseline for that will be fine, but it will not be what attracts premium mission-aligned buyers.
Those new technologies can also make the collection of that data much more timely and cost-effective as well. So I think that's a really exciting area. But I want to bring in Jacob here. Based on what Freddie and James have just said, what do you see in terms of the buyer's appetite for credits that deliver more than just the bare minimum in terms of the Peatland Code standard? And are they willing to pay a premium for those that go above and beyond and deliver co-benefits?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll be echoing a lot of what Freddie just said. I mean, of course, it really depends on the buyer. Some really are just looking to make a donation or to do the bare minimum, make a very specific claim around that. But I think for those that are still very active in the market right now, such as us, for example, going above and beyond is essential. I mean, what I mentioned before really applies here as well. We don't just go based on what the standard or the methodology or our rating agency says. We make our own decision. We make our own assessments. We would look at things like land tenure and security in an area, which wouldn't apply here, but it applies in many places around the world. We'd be looking at water scarcity, biodiversity issues, land conversion issues, all kinds of things. And if the standard or methodology is kind of neutral on these aspects, but it's something that we detect, we would either expect the standard to be updated to reflect that. If that's not the case, we would hope that the developer and landowner themselves will be willing to implement those extra measures. And if that's not the case, we would actually oblige the counterparty to do that contractually if they want to have the investment. So, and then we would have to have much more controls on it ourselves. I mean, obviously, it makes much more sense to work with somebody who's willing to do this themselves and sees the interest in doing so, the value in doing so. But it's basically critical, I would say, for any project in our portfolio.
Before we wrap up this segment, I want us to reflect a little bit on the future opportunities. The carbon market is evolving fast. Are you optimistic, for instance, Freddie, about how the market is evolving and the opportunities it might present for scaling peatland restoration in the UK?
I am. I'd be in a bit of a pickle if I said I wasn't. We are. Yeah, I'm genuinely very optimistic about the future. I think there's still a lot of things to iron out, absolutely. But particularly here in the UK, and we are talking about homegrown projects for delivery here in the UK that are real and tangible. I think everything is moving in the right direction. It's taking a long time. When we started this business, I think we thought it would all be sorted within a few months. That was what the mood music felt like. But deals take a long time. They take a lot of trust. They take a lot of resilience between all parties to believe that it can be done. But we're starting to demonstrate that it can within the peatland space. And I'm really excited by where that's going. And if I look across the policy network, which is ultimately what may well be the main driver of demand and catalysing the market at scale, I look at DEFRA exploring how to accelerate the demand side market with expert roundtables ongoing at the moment. I look at the interim principles for responsible investing, the natural capital market frameworks, and their equivalents across all of the devolved governments as well. And they're all emphatically behind the Peatland Code and the Woodland Code as best practice standards, and businesses' understanding and knowledge of what they need to be doing is increasing as well. And with all of the haziness around, carbon as a standalone element, I think what Jacob touched on earlier around potentially there's a few different markets evolving, and some of that is sponsorship and philanthropy. Those are there. Those are still there, and they may well be gaining in traction. But the interesting thing is that in our interactions with buyers, those buyers are still interested in the code as an almost insurance policy to make sure that there is an independent oversight of that project, that it is going to deliver on its intended outcomes, and that they can be confident that they've got a risk mitigated project in their portfolio rather than a project that perhaps might introduce a level of reputational risks that they are not comfortable with. So on balance,
so we're in a strong position in the UK.
I think we're in a really good position now for it to kick on from, and I think a few of the demand signals that there are today are essential for catalysing that, and we know that there are going to be other things breaking cover in the sector over the next few months that will further catalyse that.
James, if I can come to you now, Freddie talked about essentially there's lots of ducks that you have to line up in a row, right, in order to get a project over the line. What have you learned along the way, and what's been most helpful to you as a landowner in navigating the market and getting all those ducks lined up in a row?
Well, I think to be entirely honest, we at our heart are farmers, and we are farming sheep and cattle on marginal ground. The idea to me, we have an excavator on the farm, and the idea of putting a machine like that out onto the hill that we see in here, in my head, my skepticism came from you could potentially make a lot more mess than you resolve. So we came at this from a standing start back in 2022 to try and repair and restore some of the soils and the peatland areas that we had. We knew nothing about the process to achieve that, and when Nature Scott was advertising that there was funds available, we went into it with a skepticism as to see how this would work. We did not envisage where we are today with Volkswagen. So we began that process, but it became clear very quickly that the policies and procedures at that time were, I felt, a little undefined or a little not well understood by those that were out there, and certainly not well understood by myself. So it became clear that we needed to have assistance from an external agency that had their finger on the pulse, that in our case was CCP. That was able to act as a force for good in the process, but also as a sort of a hand that reassured as well, to make sure that we were doing the right thing. And I think that there'll be a lot of people out there looking at peatland restoration at a private level. Maybe at a corporate level it's different, but at a private level that don't have the capacity and time to get into the level of detail, because by the time you've done that, it's probably moved again. So I think that we would never have got to where we are without that. So I've learned that there is a lot one can do, and possibly you can take it all the way. But from our point of view, we don't specialise in that, and we needed the assistance and assurance from another body to do that, and where we have gone from as a family farm to now have this partnership, we couldn't be more pleased, because it's such a good fit for us. There were others who were interested, but sort of using Jacob and going through with Volkswagen, they recognised what we wanted to do. I know they have a number of projects across the world, and we really felt that we fitted in with that.
No, it's a great success story. Jacob, if I can turn to you now, Freddie conveyed a very strong sense of optimism as regards the future evolution of voluntary carbon markets. Do you share that optimism? And what future trends do you see shaping buyer expectations? And specifically, I mean, haven't we seen over the last 12 months or so a little bit of a rowback on some of the net zero climate pledges made only a few years ago by major corporate players? So do you sense that will turn around? Is there still a lot of interest in the market? What do you think is on the horizon as regards how buyers are engaging in this?
Yeah, I mean, this gets a little bit back to your initial question where I said there's a short-term and a long-term way of looking at this. This is more the long-term trajectory. Yeah, I mean, it's it's been a challenge, of course. I think the biggest issue, as I outlined before, is more or less the disappearance of a solid use case for credits, which has required buyers who are still active in the voluntary space to sort of come up with their own use cases across a wide variety of options. I think that's fine, and it for example, for us at the moment, it still works, and for a few core buyers, it can still work. But I think if you're relying on either philanthropy or sort of a few big buyers, that's not really a market. I mean, it would stabilize maybe at a low level. It could continue like that for some time, but it won't really grow. I think if you want to see the scale required to really get where we need to go, and if you really are thinking in terms of net zero strategies and kind of really bending the curve of emissions and incorporating carbon credits into that, it does require some kind of regulatory certainty, either globally or locally, to make that happen. I mean, I'm less of an expert than the rest of the panel on what's happening in the UK. I think we were very happy to see how the Peatland Code is really trying to integrate with DEFRA and some other initiatives happening domestically to see how you can really kind of create that foundation to build upon. Looking globally, though, which, as I said, we do have a global footprint, even though our headquarters is in Germany. It's obviously been a huge challenge. At the global level, we have Article 6 or the Paris level agreements taking place, and the mechanisms there that are coming together, but very slowly. That's probably more of like a 10-year trajectory that can give some kind of demand signal to the market that would be underpinned with kind of a compliance level requirement from companies to do something alongside nation states. But then you also have countries themselves moving at different speeds, some not moving at all, some moving very rapidly. I think the way we're looking at it is we try to take more of a portfolio approach and just see, okay, because we are operating globally, some regions are moving much more faster here. They're much more ambitious. They do have kind of a solid compliance framework coming within the next couple of years. That's something we can work with quite nicely. And that does give us kind of an impetus to stay engaged and to develop more projects and to integrate it in some form into a corporate strategy. In other places where it's either stalled or reversed, it's much bigger challenge. And there you do have to rely more on just, grant-based philanthropy or other kind of arrangements, maybe local investments. You would have to kind of communicate it a different way. But you kind of want to balance these issues of, you don't want to go in the direction of claiming more than you can claim from a legal perspective. I mean, that leads to greenwashing and all kinds of other accusations. On the other hand, you need some kind of policy certainty to kind of pull you in the other direction. Otherwise, you're basically just pedaling in place. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. I think long term, though, it will have to be some clarity coming either from national or international legislation to really push that. And that's the expectation I think a lot of buyers do have.
Yeah, and accelerate the market. Yeah, thank you. Fantastic discussion so far, gentlemen. Thank you for sharing all of your insights and contributions. We have now about 20 minutes for questions and answers from the audience. So we'll just read them out as they come along. So we have one from Sophie. Thank you. I work on a peatland restoration project and I'm unsure if there's any environmental benefit. How are you measuring and verifying the outcomes? That sounds like one for Freddie and James.
I had a funny feeling that might come my way.
I have a couple myself.
Good to start on a technical one, and I'll try and avoid delving into some jargon around it all. The Peatland Code is, as we said before, it's a government-backed standard. It is a models-based standard. There isn't a flux tower on every single project that's out there. But the emissions factors, which are used to calculate the emission reduction taking place as a result of a Peatland Code project, are constantly being updated as the science develops and moves. The thing that gives everyone confidence in that as well, in terms of the integrity on the whole, is they are the same emissions factors that the government use to calculate their own inventory. So there's direct alignment between local and government policy and the actual Peatland Code and standard itself. So from a carbon perspective alone, the integrity is there. And while it is models based, that's from a costs perspective as much as anything, it is the internationally recognized standard for doing that. In terms of the other elements, it's about targeted measuring to create that, as I say, objective data to prove what's happening. So that can be everything from regular monitoring of the condition of the works on the ground itself to make sure that you are achieving a positive condition change in the ground on your journey towards having a near natural habitat. And then you can factor in the other things around co-benefits. And they are very broad, what you could include. But as I said already, the easier ones today are bioacoustic monitoring for bird diversity and abundance. You can do very detailed invertebrate studies, which show incredible change in a very, very short time. James can perhaps elaborate on the impact on wetness and pooling and habitat from the project that's been delivered. But what you see is, I won't spoil the fun in terms of the type of things that are coming back, but there are things on the hill there now in abundance levels that there just wasn't before. And we can monitor that. The other piece of this that we haven't touched on around today as well is around socioeconomic impact itself. And there's some really interesting work going on with regard in Scotland around Community Land Scotland and the Land Commission themselves around roadmaps for community engagement and inclusion. And again, more and more we see buyers see that as the social acceptance and the social license to operate, to use a kind of cliched phrase, is something that is becoming really important. And how that project fits into the local community and what benefits it brings, not necessarily financially at all, actually, but in terms of local jobs is an example. And actually Carroglen's a really good example of that. The contractor that did the restoration works is the same contractor that has been facilitated by the financial flows to do maintenance interventions on the site as well. And so that's bringing money directly into the local economies that can only be a good thing. And then I looked at the bigger picture from a CCP perspective, and we're a 4.5-year-old business now, and we have 16, 17 full-time employees and a network of 30 or so freelancers that we use on a regular basis. And again, that's creating a resilient rural economy that is future-proofed and looking forward to grow as well.
Were any of those part of your motivations as well, James, for engaging in this market?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, ultimately our motivation was to the biodiversity uplift on the hill, and also to stop it sliding any further than where it had got to. My answer to your question would be a lot less intelligent than Freddie's, but I mean we are effectively a boots on the ground, using our eyes and ears to see the change, and the change is definitely evident in terms of what we are experiencing up there. The hill has been under quite a significant surgery, and it needs time, and it goes back again to this monitoring aspect, as you do need to exercise a degree of patience because and restraint to a degree, because the monitoring that I do, while unscientific in comparison, we do get the data, of course, from Freddie's side, is that you don't want to be sending machines up there every 5 minutes, or you don't want to react to every single thing you see that might not be perfect. You've got to let nature have a moment of pause and regenerate. So that there is an element of that, and I think that we just manage that ourselves through what we see, and whether or not what Freddie is reflecting in the data he passes is what we're seeing on the ground.
And while we were chatting earlier before the webinar, you were talking about changing boundaries, land boundaries, and neighbours also being a motivating factor for your engagement in the market. So I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about that, because that's interesting, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a big part, and we are reflecting an element of what's happening in Scotland to a degree. So our boundaries used to be with more recent traditional hill farm ownership, where we've got absentee landlords own for sporting interest, whether it's grouse or red deer or pheasant on the lower ground, but a sporting interest, and maybe a tenanted or employed shepherd running hill sheep. We've now moved to 95% of our boundary is now corporate ownership of our neighbours, which comes with the corporate management. It is much more focused on biodiversity. It's more interested in timber and carbon and peatland restoration. Perhaps not conducting muir burn, that type of activity. We're very respectful of their management techniques. We don't have to agree for them to be right or wrong, and vice versa. But I think it's an interesting dynamic that's happening across Scotland. We are a traditional hill farm that is still running sheep, and we are producing around about 10,000 portions of food per year. We're sequestering more carbon than we're emitting. We've had a huge biodiversity uplift. We've got plantations that have gone in that won't be harvested, sort of native broadleaf plantations. And on our boundaries, similar activities are happening. But we do feel to a degree that we have to take ownership of the potential problem of changes on our boundaries, in that you could argue that removing all grazing livestock, removing a significant burden of deer, which is another grazing element to foliage, filling the hills with timber, and then combining that with more extreme climate. I worry, from my point of view, and I've been worrying about it for many years, is that the risk of wildfire is potentially increasing in Scotland despite our climate. And we've seen elements of this already. But I think it's worth looking at our side and saying, well, the peatland restoration that we have done, we can manage the above soil grazing element, effectively the fuel load. But by doing the peatland restoration, we've also now managing subsoil, where we are increasing the moisture in the dried areas of peatland, so that if or when that fire comes, then we are as best protected as we can. So it's another level of peatland restoration benefit to us that we didn't set out to do, but I think that one has to be aware of what's happening on your boundaries, so that you can work respectfully with those people and very productively. We have a good relationship with our neighbours, but also look internally as well as to say, what can I do with my side of it as well.
Thank you. No, very interesting perspective. Thank you, James. We've had a question come in from Elizabeth Matthew. Thank you, Elizabeth. What is your return on investment for these peatland projects with carbon revenue? That sounds like you, Freddie.
I thought that might come. I was sitting here thinking, this one's coming to me again. Great. It's a really interesting question. And we work with landowners across the country. So there's a full spread of what a landowner feels in terms of their assumptions that they're going to make towards a project. Some are more driven by the environmental impact and positive change. Some are more commercially minded and commercially focused. So we do spend quite a bit of time doing discounted cash flows and the likes for those that are more commercially minded and want to understand what the returns look like. I'd like to have a kind of more direct one-to-one conversation, because it's a difficult one to answer directly, only because every site's different and everyone's assumptions are different with it. You have sites that are very, very complex, very expensive to restore at the front end, and may also carry a higher maintenance burden. And so your confidence in carbon price may need to be higher, / will need to be higher, to be able to generate a similar return. Equally, where you have you're reversing an anthropogenic impact of blocking ditches that were pulled across the habitat historically, you may be a lower cost intervention, lower maintenance expectations over time, and therefore you may not need to realise the same carbon price. So you can make your IRR whatever you want it to be to a certain extent. It's the credibility of the assumptions that are what actually underpins it. There are examples out there of natural capital projects now delivering over 10% IRR in their return on investment over time. That's really positive and encouraging. Equally, though, I think that we do need to accept, and investors need to accept and understand, that perhaps the levels of return that were expected from an infrastructural project are not necessarily equivalent to those that can be expected from a nature-based project, because there are so many other facets to it. The resilience of our economy hangs on the success of nature, and I think the understanding of that is rising up quite rapidly at the moment. And forward-thinking organisations like Rebalance Earth and Restore and others are encapsulating that and translating that in plain English in a way that's really, really exciting for an increase in speed and scale.
I think that question also comes back to what Jacob was saying, that there's a full range of buyers and buyer motivations out there as well. There will be those that are interested in the high IRR, and those that are maybe engaged more in the market from a more corporate philanthropic side. So there will be the full range of buyer expectations and motivations in the market as well. I have a question. I've worked mostly in carbon markets in an international setting, and particularly with regard to mangrove restoration. This is a question I'm often asked. and I think it probably comes up quite a lot with regard to peatland restoration as well. James, you talked about your property being a fairly small hill farm, but that has had success in this area. But how can we ensure that smaller projects can be made financially viable and have successes in this area?
Am I going to be asked that one?
Well, actually, anyone. I mean, are there? I'm very happy for Jacob to come in here on that as well. Are buyers also interested in smaller projects, or is a minimum ticket size a constraint for you?
Yeah, I can step in there really quick. I mean, so as I said, it does range. It's global in nature, and the scales also vary quite a bit. Frankly, we usually, because we are a large scale buyer in the market, and because we have limited, staffing, limited number of staff, our liquidity has to be managed. There's all kinds of considerations we have to take. We usually do have a minimum ticket size in terms of project engagements, just to make it worth it for us and also make it worth it for our clients. I mean, we simply can't manage a very, very large number of very tiny projects. That being said, we do always leave space open within our portfolio for smaller projects. The example of the peatland restoration with the Robbs is one good example of that. It's rather on the smaller end. It wouldn't be typical, I would say, but because we do have, even within the Volkswagen Group, a broad range of interests. Sometimes a brand or an office will really just be looking for a local investment opportunity close to production facilities or an office of some kind, something they can drive to, something they can see with their own eyes without having to fly halfway around the world. And so these can work as well, but it's rather the exception to the rule, at least for us. And I know others have different preferences, but that's how it works for us. And I think the larger buyers tend to be similar to the way we operate there.
It's really interesting. Like the scale question is one that does come up a lot.
Yeah.
And certainly from an institutional investor's perspective, scale is required. And there are organizations out there deploying cash at scale today to explore the concept of how to make that work effectively. I suppose the headline number there is Oxygen Conservation, who are building a significant natural capital portfolio from a land holdings perspective. And so there's an evidence base building there that scale is possible here in the UK. Equally, the project at Carroglen is quite a small project in the scale of projects that the Peatland Code can deliver. In this instance, that was to a certain extent what's attractive about it, because at the scale that it is, an exclusive arrangement can be made. So there's different buyers with different interests and different scale expectations. And if we look at the SME sector, for example, in the UK itself, there's not going to be, unlikely to be, the capital reserves to be able to deploy significant amounts of cash into larger projects. But where the larger projects then become attractive there is from a landowner perspective, you can you can get some capital into your project by selling some units, but not sell all of them. So there's a bit of a risk approach there, whereby if your project under-delivers for an unforeseen event, there's a bit of a buffer there for you that you can draw from to be able to make up the difference to any end user that has perhaps invested in your project.
I would also just quickly add that, I mean, while I would disagree with myself, there's nothing uniquely incredible about Carroglen that sets us apart from being special, that nobody else could follow this train. We have some unique aspects to us which add value, but we have found a way to achieve this. Probably a little bit through our ethos as to how we manage our ground, but there are definitely, I feel, opportunities out there for smaller projects to find good homes and good partnerships with people.
Yeah,
so totally on that basis, James, where would you advise someone to start if they were interested? You've been through it, so what are your...
well, it starts with yourself. Ultimately, we while we are a business, we are also a home, so there's a factor there. I think one needs to understand where you want to go with this project and what you want to deliver and what you see as a credible and best case scenario outcome for you. It has definitely facilitated more than just a peatland restoration project for us. We do now have funds to take on and do other more uplift, more projects on the land, more enhancements. So I think you start with yourself as to what you would like to achieve from it, what you would hope to achieve from it, and then start getting in people who really understand the market and the process to get there, and build it. You will not be able to sit down and describe the whole process. It'll put you off even starting. You need to start with yourself and work it up, and then see where it could potentially go to.
Okay. One come in for Jacob. What role do co-benefits like biodiversity and community engagement play in buyer decision making? We touched on this before. Are there buyers interested in purchasing these co-benefits? Can they be monetized effectively?
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to do it. You're right. We did touch on this before, and I mentioned that we do always take our own approach to different intervention types. We have sort of base criteria for all projects, and then intervention-specific criteria that we would always want to see included in that. Within the carbon portfolio, all projects do have to include a social and biodiversity component to that. So I mean, that's very easy in this case because it's just so integral. But then it's basically just baked into the price of the credit. So I mean, it's a little bit hard to monetize it separately from that perspective. And different standards handle this differently. Some have additional labels you can apply on top of the carbon credits. Others you have to build it in yourself. It just really depends. In terms of monetizing those benefits separately, we do also work with various kind of biodiversity funds and social funds within the group that do look at these various impacts individually, kind of a separate from the carbon side. So there are ways to do that. We don't look at biodiversity credits, for example, at the moment, but that's something that could be used in the future, or at least the metrics could be used in terms of the kinds of investments that we do. So, I mean, it's very important to us. Exactly how you monetize that and exactly how it's included varies. But it would always have to be there.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of work happening right now on biodiversity credits and metrics and frameworks for monitoring and measuring those co-benefits. Okay, we have just a few minutes left, so thank you to all of you for your questions and your insights, our panelists. Before we conclude today, I wanted to ask each of you one final question, and perhaps you could answer in about 1 minute each. From your side of the market, so we have the developer, we have the landowner, we have the buyer. What is the most important thing that you think the other two should understand, and why? Who would like to go first?
I'll jump in first just in case someone says something that I'm going to say.
Good strategy.
I think ultimately, I've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but I think it's very important that they understand what my motivation is, what's driving me to do it, what am I trying to achieve. Is it on the scale, is it the philanthropic end, or is it very much an investment to recover cash? Is it about biodiversity uplift? Are we looking at flood mitigation? Are we looking at improving hydro schemes, or all of the above? And I think from our point of view, that was important for us, for them to understand what we were hoping to achieve, because I think while there is a fairly defined course for this as in terms of how one goes about it, I think you can tap the edges, you can refine and tailor it to yourself to make it work. So it was important that we teamed up with people that understood us and were able to guide us through the process to achieve what we collectively all wanted to get to.
I'll jump in now then. I think from a landowner perspective, I think it's important. I think I would be emphasising the fact that the Peatland Code is the accepted and recognised standard here in the UK, but it is the starting point. And to stand out from the crowd and actually generate interest in your projects, you need to be going above and beyond the mandatory minimum requirements that the code dictates. And from a buyer perspective, I wish they understood the Peatland Code more and understood that actually it's delivering an immediate, positive, high integrity impact there and then. And the independent verification and validation is there, the support is there for it, and it's a viable option to have immediate positive impact now in a risk-reduced manner. And I think the more that we can shout about that and communicate that message, that there is a project here that can have positive impact now and not 25, 35 years in the future, the better.
Absolutely. Thanks, Freddie. Jacob?
Yeah, we were asked to think about this question, and I'm going to point out something that actually isn't necessarily the case here. It's the case with a lot of projects, but everything that James and Freddie have been saying for the last hour actually shows that we're very much on the same page, I think. So that's a good thing. But what I would really want, I think, landowners and project developers to understand from the buyer's perspective is that I don't think the market works based on a philanthropy model. At least it can't be scaled that way. It works based on good business relationships. I mean, we see this as a business partnership, ideally a good business partnership based on the contract. The landowners, the project developers, they do good work. They go above and beyond. We compensate them for that. It should be maintained over long periods of time. It's not simply a donation and a walk away. I mean, we really see this as something that should be maintained, and it needs to be maintained, actually. If you're talking about ecosystem restoration, you can't just give money once and then expect things to be done. It actually takes work. It takes time. And that's based on a good, I think, positive relationship between investor and buyer. That's very, very important. So that's what I would want them to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Relationships are super important. So I think that's a really good note to end on. We're out of time today, unfortunately. Certainly many more conversations still to be held on this topic. I'd like to thank all of our panellists for sharing their wisdom and insights with us today. And thank you to all of you for joining online today. It's abundantly clear we have a lot of expertise and experience here in the UK and internationally to draw on. So my plea to any audience member who's interested in learning more and understanding more about this market is please have a look online at Caledonian Climate's website. Reach out to any one of us. We'd be very happy to help. And thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.